she was in pain every day. The lone rancher who shocked the town. Mary Thompson lived on the edge of a small town in Texas on a ranch that had been in her family for generations. The land stretched wide, golden in the mornings and soft green after the rains. From a distance it looked peaceful, almost perfect. The sun rose slowly over the hills, and the cattle wandered quietly, grazing on the fields that seemed to go on forever. But underneath that calm and quiet beauty, Mary carried a secret that no one in the town fully understood. Every day of her life she felt pain. Deep, constant, and exhausting pain that weighed on her like a heavy stone. Mary had been living on the ranch alone for many years. Her husband had passed away more than a decade ago, leaving her with the land, the animals, and memories that sometimes felt sharper than the knives she used in the kitchen. She did not have children, and her closest relatives lived far away in cities where life moved quickly and connections were often limited to phone calls. Despite the loneliness, Mary chose to stay on her ranch. This was her home. It was the place she knew, the place she loved, even if it demanded more from her body than she could sometimes give. The town knew Mary as quiet and strong. When the locals saw her, they thought of her as someone who could handle anything. She fixed broken fences, fed the animals in blistering heat, and shoveled snow in the rare Texas winters. She worked from dawn to dusk, never asking for help, always keeping a gentle smile on her face. But behind that smile, her body ached constantly. Her back throbbed when she lifted heavy buckets of feed. Her knees protested every step on the uneven ground, and her hands were rough and stiff from years of labor. There were mornings when she woke up feeling like she had been run over by a storm, but she never showed it. She had learned early on to hide the pain, to move with careful grace so no one could tell how much she struggled. Even in the quiet moments, Mary's pain followed her. Sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, she could feel the stiffness in her shoulders. Feeding the chickens in the early morning chill made her fingers ache so much that sometimes she had to pause and breathe deeply. Yet, she continued because the ranch depended on her. The animals depended on her. Her pride and determination had become a shield, protecting her from the pity of others and even from herself. Her neighbors occasionally tried to check on her. Mr. Davis, the local store owner, often asked if she needed extra supplies. "Mary, let me bring you some hay," he would say with a kind smile, and she would wave him off with a small laugh. "I've got it, thanks," she would reply. No one really knew how much pain she was hiding, and Mary preferred it that way. Pride and independence had always been part of her. The town doctor, Dr. Kyles Henderson, had known Mary for years. He saw her occasionally during checkups, though she rarely went unless something became unbearable. He knew she was suffering. He could see the signs, the way she moved slowly, the subtle wince when she bent over, the quiet groan when she lifted heavy objects. But Mary was a master of hiding her pain. She always brushed it off. "I'm fine, doctor," she would insist. "Just an old body doing its job." Henderson respected her determination, but worried for her health. He understood the burden she carried alone. Mary's days followed a pattern. She woke before sunrise, letting the animals outside while the air was cool and crisp. She tended to the cattle, making sure they had fresh water and clean spaces to rest. She repaired fences, often climbing ladders or carrying heavy tools. She worked the land, planting and harvesting vegetables and herbs that she used for her meals. She kept her home clean, cooked simple meals, and maintained a rhythm that others in the town envied for its discipline and resilience. Yet, each action was performed with a hidden effort, a struggle that no one could see. Sometimes in the stillness of the evening, Mary allowed herself to pause and reflect. She would sit on her porch, watching the sky turn from bright blue to orange and pink, and feel the aching in her muscles. The pain was a constant companion, but she refused to let it control her spirit. She thought of her husband, of the life they had shared on this ranch, and she reminded herself that she was still capable. She had survived loss, loneliness, and hardship before, and she would continue to survive. Despite her quiet nature, Mary was not completely isolated. A few neighbors visited occasionally, bringing small gifts like a basket of fresh bread or a jar of homemade jam. They often commented on her determination and the beauty of her ranch, but none truly understood the daily struggle she faced. Some admired her from afar, thinking of her as a symbol of strength. Others whispered about her stubbornness, unable to imagine why someone would choose to live alone on such a large property while battling unseen pain. Mary did not mind. She was used to being misunderstood. Her loneliness was sometimes heavy, but it had a companion: freedom. On the ranch, she could live by her own rules. She could rise with the sun, work until her body demanded rest, and spend her evenings in silence. She could feel connected to the land in a way that she could not feel in town. Every hill, every tree, every animal had a story, and she was a part of it. This connection was her comfort, her reason to endure. Yet, as the years passed, the pain grew harder to ignore. Small injuries that she would have brushed off before became bigger challenges. The arthritis in her hands made it harder to grip tools. The stiffness in her back made it difficult to bend without wincing. And still, she continued, each morning she reminded herself that she was not weak. She reminded herself that her pain did not define her. She reminded herself that she was capable of living a life that others might find impossible, because she had learned the value of persistence. Mary's story was not one of dramatic events or sudden crises. It was a story of quiet endurance. It was about waking up each day with a body that betrayed her, and still finding the strength to move forward. It was about choosing to live fully, even when life seemed unfair. It was about a woman who refused to be defined by her suffering, who found meaning in her work, in her land, and in the few connections she had with the world around her. By the end of each day, Mary would sit on her porch once again. The sky would darken, stars would appear, and a soft wind would blow across the ranch. She would feel the pain, yes, but she would also feel pride. Pride in her independence, pride in the life she had built, and pride in her ability to endure. And though no one in the town fully understood the weight she carried, Mary knew something that was her own secret strength. The pain had not broken her. It had shaped her, strengthened her, and made her who she was, a quiet, resilient, and determined woman who faced each day with courage even when the world did not see it. Mary Thompson's pain was no secret to her own body, but it remained invisible to most of the town. While she carried on with her daily chores, subtle signs began to appear. Signs that something was not quite right. A bucket of water might slip from her hands because her fingers ached too much to hold it steadily. A misstep on the uneven ground might make her wince as her knees protested each movement. Even the simple task of carrying feed to the cattle became a battle she fought silently. Her pride would not allow her to complain, and yet her body was sending warnings she could not ignore. The townspeople began noticing small changes in her.
Mr. Davis, the store owner, was the first to comment.
"Mary," he said one morning, adjusting the strap of a bag of grain she was carrying. "You've been slower than usual lately. Are you sure you're okay?" Mary laughed softly, brushing off his concern. "Just the old bones, Mr. Davis." "Nothing to worry about," she replied, setting the grain down on her porch. She tried to make her words light, almost joking, but inside she knew it was more serious than that. Her body had begun to betray her, and no amount of smiles could hide it. Her neighbor, Tom Henderson, who lived a mile down the road, had also noticed. Tom had always respected Mary's independence and her ability to manage the ranch on her own. He admired her courage, her determination, and the way she treated her animals with patience and care. Yet, lately, he could not ignore the signs of struggle. One afternoon he saw her struggling to lift a heavy sack of feed. He wanted to help, but Mary waved him off. "I've got it, Tom!" "Don't worry," she said, her voice firm but strained. Tom shook his head, feeling helpless. He wished there was a way to make her accept help without offending her pride. Even Dr. Henderson, the town doctor, grew more concerned. During the rare checkups Mary allowed herself to take, he could see the evidence of long-standing strain. Her back was stiff, her posture slightly bent, and her movements were cautious. "Mary," he said gently one day, adjusting his glasses as he examined her, "these pains aren't normal." "You need to take care of yourself." Mary smiled faintly, trying to mask the tension in her face. "I'm fine, doctor. Just getting older," she said. But he knew better. Chronic pain had been part of her life for years, and ignoring it would only make it worse. Mary herself tried to cope in quiet ways. She would stretch slowly in the mornings, trying to ease the stiffness in her joints. She rubbed ointments on her back, soaked in warm water, and rested whenever she could, but the work on the ranch never stopped. The animals still needed her care, the fences still needed repair, and the garden still demanded attention. Her pride and sense of responsibility kept her moving, even when every muscle begged for rest. The pain also affected her emotionally. Sometimes, as she sat alone in the evenings, the quiet of the ranch felt heavier than usual. The wind whispered across the fields, and the distant calls of animals were the only sounds she could hear. Her mind drifted to memories of the past, her husband who had shared these fields with her, the friends she had once known, and the life she had built alone after loss. Her body ached, but her heart ached in different ways. She longed for understanding, for someone to see her struggle without judgment, but she knew that pride had kept her distant from the world. Yet Mary refused to let the pain control her life completely. She continued to rise before dawn, tending to her animals with careful attention. Each movement was deliberate, each step calculated to avoid further injury. When lifting hay bales or carrying water, she paused when necessary, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Even though her body protested, her mind remained focused. She knew that if she slowed down too much, the work would pile up and the ranch would suffer. Her determination became a quiet story for the town. People began to talk, noticing that Mary's movements were slower, her steps measured. Some whispered that she was pushing herself too hard, that she should accept help. Others admired her even more, seeing in her a strength that was almost legendary. Mary, however, remained focused on her life, not on the opinions of others. She had learned long ago that endurance often meant suffering quietly, and she had grown accustomed to being alone with her struggles. One afternoon, as Mary worked in the garden, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her back. She had been bending to pull weeds when the sudden twinge forced her to stop. She leaned on the wooden fence for support, taking shallow breaths. The pain was intense, and for a moment she allowed herself to admit that she could not do everything on her own. But even then she refused to call for help. She straightened her back slowly, murmuring to herself, "Just a moment, Mary. You can manage." She returned to her chores with caution, moving slowly but determinedly. Despite the increasing difficulty, Mary's routines remained unchanged. She woke early, fed the animals, repaired fences, and tended her land. She walked slowly across fields, feeling each step in her knees, but continued because she had no other choice. The land needed her care, and she had dedicated her life to it. Her hands were rough from years of work, but they were also skilled and careful. Every task she performed was a testament to her resilience, even if no one fully understood the effort involved. Occasionally, she allowed herself small joys that reminded her life was worth living. A warm cup of tea on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. The sound of cattle lowing softly in the distance. The smell of fresh hay and earth after a rain. These simple pleasures became her reward, moments that reminded her that even in pain, there was beauty and peace. Mary also had moments of reflection where she considered what the future might hold. She wondered if she could continue alone for many more years, or if the pain would eventually demand that she seek help. But even in these thoughts, she never let fear dominate her. She believed in her ability to endure, in her strength to face what came. The pain was a constant companion, yes, but it had also made her disciplined, careful, and thoughtful. Her neighbors continued to notice subtle changes. Tom, the neighbor, tried again one evening to offer assistance. "Mary, you've been overworking yourself again. Let me help with the chores tomorrow," he said, worry in his voice. Mary shook her head gently, forcing a smile. "I appreciate it, Tom, but I manage fine. Really." Yet Tom could see the weariness in her eyes, and he worried about how long she could maintain this independence. Dr. Henderson, too, became more insistent. During her next checkup, he suggested a treatment plan, including therapy and rest periods. Mary listened politely, but her pride made it hard to follow through. She knew that life on the ranch could not stop for her pain. Every decision she made was a balance between survival, duty, and her own well-being. Through all of this, Mary's inner strength was remarkable. Pain had shaped her life, but it had not broken her spirit. She found ways to manage, ways to adapt, and ways to keep going. Each day was a victory, even if it was small and quiet. She learned to listen to her body, to pace herself, and to take moments of rest when necessary. Her story, though quiet, began to resonate in small ways with the town. People began to understand that Mary's life was not easy, that she carried burdens they could not see. Respect and admiration for her courage grew, even among those who had previously seen her only as a stubborn, lonely woman. Mary did not seek recognition, but her resilience could not be ignored. And so, life continued on the ranch. The days were long and the work was never ending. Pain was always present, whispering reminders of age, injuries, and past hardships. But Mary Thompson, the lone rancher, faced each day with courage. She rose with the sun, worked through aches and stiffness, and found moments of peace amidst the struggle. Her story was one of quiet endurance, resilience, and determination. A story that would eventually capture the attention of the town, shocking them not because of what she did, but because of the courage and strength she carried silently for so many years. Winter came earlier that year than anyone expected. The winds were sharp and the frost crept over the fields before sunrise. Mary Thompson woke to a world covered in a thin layer of ice. The cattle huddled together for warmth, their breath rising in small clouds against the cold air. Mary wrapped herself in thick layers, her hands already stiff from the chill, and stepped outside. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, as the cold made her body ache even more than usual. Her back twinged as she lifted the heavy buckets of water, her knees groaning in protest. But she continued because the animals depended on her, because the land demanded care, and because she refused to let the winter stop her. The days grew shorter, and the sun barely reached the horizon. Mary rose before dawn and worked until dusk, shivering through chores that had become increasingly difficult. She shoveled snow from the paths, made sure the cattle had enough feed, and repaired fences broken by the harsh winter winds. Each task was heavier than the last, each movement a reminder that her body was reaching its limits. Yet she persisted, her pride and responsibility driving her forward. She could not imagine asking for help, and even if she did, she was not sure anyone would understand the full extent of her struggle. One morning, as Mary carried a large sack of feed to the barn, her foot slipped on a patch of ice. She stumbled, twisting her ankle and feeling a sharp pain shoot through her leg. For a moment, she froze, leaning on the barn door for support. Her back and knees protested every movement, and a wave of frustration mixed with fear washed over her. She knew she should rest, but the cattle needed food, and the barn needed attention. Slowly, she managed to lift herself upright and continued her task, each step agonizing. Her body was warning her, pleading with her to slow down, but Mary was determined. The accident, small as it seemed, became a turning point. That evening, as she sat by the fireplace rubbing her sore ankle, she realized that she could not continue alone forever. The winter was harsh, and her body had limits she could no longer ignore. She thought about Tom, the neighbor who had offered help before, and Mr. Davis at the store. She realized that accepting help did not mean giving up. It meant acknowledging that she had endured enough on her own. Still, the thought of asking for assistance filled her with discomfort. Independence had always been part of her identity. The next day, Mary struggled to complete her chores. Every movement was measured, every step calculated to avoid further injury. She tried to feed the cattle with one hand while supporting herself with the other, but it was slow and exhausting. The pain was constant, sharp, and unrelenting. She paused several times to breathe deeply, trying to steady herself and push through the discomfort. By mid-morning, she realized she could not carry another sack of feed without risking further injury. With a sigh, Mary made the decision to accept help. She walked carefully to the edge of the property and waved to Tom, who had been checking on the nearby fence. Tom saw her signal and hurried over, concern written across his face. "Mary, what happened? Are you okay?" he asked. Mary explained her ankle, her pain, and her realization that she could no longer manage everything alone. Tom nodded gently, understanding more than she could imagine.
"Let's get you inside first, then we'll figure out the rest,"
he said. Tom helped Mary inside her home, guiding her to a chair and fetching warm water for her swollen ankle. He noticed the stiffness in her back and the weariness in her eyes.
"Mary, you've been hiding a lot,"
he said softly. She nodded, looking down at her hands.
"I've managed for years," she whispered. "I didn't want anyone to see me weak."
Tom shook his head.
"You're not weak. You're human. And even humans need help sometimes." The following days brought a mixture of relief and challenge. With Tom's help, Mary could focus on her recovery while still tending to the most essential tasks on the ranch. He brought supplies, repaired fences, and helped with the heavy lifting.
Mary, though hesitant at first, began to see that accepting help did not diminish her strength. Instead, it allowed her to continue living on the ranch she loved without risking further injury. She realized that her pride had been a barrier, not a shield. Around the same time, Dr. Henderson insisted on a proper medical examination. Mary finally agreed, knowing that she could not ignore her pain any longer. The tests revealed long-standing conditions: severe arthritis in her hands and knees, a partially healed injury in her back, and early signs of another chronic condition. The news was not entirely surprising to Mary, but hearing it aloud made it real. She understood that her body had been struggling silently for years, and now it was time to address it properly.
Mary began a careful routine of therapy and rest.
She learned exercises to strengthen her muscles, stretches to ease stiffness, and ways to manage her pain without completely giving up her independence. Each session was difficult, but she approached it with determination. She realized that endurance did not mean suffering in silence. It meant making choices that allowed her to continue living fully. Slowly, she began to regain small amounts of mobility and comfort. Word of Mary's injury and the severity of her condition spread through the town. People were shocked that she had been living in such pain for so long, managing every task alone. Many expressed concern, while others offered help in ways Mary had never expected. Neighbors volunteered to assist with chores, the store owner delivered supplies, and even strangers offered kind gestures. Mary was initially hesitant to accept so much attention, but she realized that the community's support did not make her weak, it made her life sustainable. Through this period, Mary reflected on her past choices. She remembered her husband, the love they shared, and the promise she had made to care for the ranch no matter what. She thought about her independence, her pride, and the years she had spent proving to herself that she could manage alone. She understood now that strength was not just about pushing through pain. It was also about knowing when to let others in, when to allow support to become part of life. Despite the challenges, Mary's spirit remained strong. She found joy in small victories, completing a task without pain, helping a calf that needed care, walking to the garden without stopping. Each success, however minor, reminded her that she was resilient, capable, and not defined solely by her pain. She began to write down her thoughts in a small notebook, reflecting on the lessons she had learned about endurance, pride, and the importance of community. The turning point had changed Mary's life. The winter had been harsh. Her injury had been serious, and the reality of her chronic pain could no longer be ignored. Yet, with help, she discovered a new way to live. Her daily life was still filled with work and responsibility, but she approached each day with a new perspective. The ranch remained her home, her sanctuary, but now it was also a place where she could accept care without fear or shame. Mary also began to notice subtle changes in her relationships with the townspeople. People who had once seen her as a solitary, stubborn woman now viewed her with admiration and respect. They recognized the courage it took to continue living independently for so long despite immense pain. Mary found herself opening up more, sharing her experiences and accepting the kindness of others. She realized that connection, support, and understanding were not signs of weakness. They were part of life. By the end of that winter, Mary had achieved a delicate balance. She could tend to her ranch with assistance, manage her pain more effectively, and maintain her independence in ways that were safe and sustainable. The turning point, her injury and the realization that she could not do everything alone, had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. She had learned to combine her strength with support, her determination with care, and her independence with the generosity of those around her. Mary Thompson, the lone rancher who had shocked the town with her silent endurance, was no longer just a figure of quiet mystery. She had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and adaptability. Her story was no longer just about pain and struggle. It was about the human capacity to face hardship, to accept help, and to continue living fully despite life's challenges.
She had been tested by winter, by injury, and by the years of silent suffering, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to her community than ever before.
Word spread through the small town like wildfire. Mary Thompson, the lone rancher who had always seemed strong, independent, and almost untouchable, had been living in severe pain for years.
How could someone so capable, so full of energy and determination, have endured such constant suffering without anyone knowing? People whispered in the stores, in cafes, and on the streets.
The story of her quiet struggle fascinated them, and soon the town began to look at Mary in a different light. For Mary herself, the attention was uncomfortable at first. She had spent decades keeping her pain private, believing that revealing it would be a sign of weakness. But now, everyone knew. The accident during the harsh winter had forced her to accept help, and her quiet endurance could no longer be hidden. Some neighbors visited to offer assistance with daily chores, while others brought food, firewood, or warm blankets. At first, Mary hesitated. Pride had been her companion for so long that opening herself to the kindness of others felt unfamiliar.
She was not used to relying on anyone. Yet slowly she realized that these acts of generosity were not meant to shame her. They were a way for the community to show care and gratitude.
Tom, her neighbor, became a constant presence. Every morning he would help with the heavier tasks, like lifting hay bales or repairing fences, while Mary focused on the tasks she could manage.
Sometimes he would watch her quietly, noticing the small signs of fatigue in her face and body. "Mary, you don't have to do everything by yourself," he said one afternoon as they worked together. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "I know," she admitted softly.
"But I like doing what I can. It makes me feel alive." Tom nodded, understanding that this was her way of maintaining independence.
The local store owner, Mr. Davis, visited more often than usual. He brought groceries, fresh bread, and sometimes a warm pie. "Mary, it's not much, but I thought you might like this," he said, smiling. Mary accepted the gifts with gratitude, realizing that the town's small gestures carried meaning. They were acknowledging her struggle and her courage. Slowly, she began to see that accepting help did not diminish her strength. It enhanced it. By allowing others in, she was creating a network of support that would help her continue living on her beloved ranch.
The revelation of Mary's suffering also changed how children in the town saw her.
They had always admired her from a distance, fascinated by the woman who worked tirelessly on the ranch. But now, learning of her struggles, they began to understand her in a new way. They saw her resilience, the courage it took to face each day in pain, and the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive alone for so many years. Some of them began to visit, offering to help with small chores, feeding the animals, or gathering eggs from the chickens. Mary, initially hesitant, began to smile more freely, appreciating the joy and energy the children brought to her ranch. Mary's relationship with the town doctor, Henderson, also grew stronger. He had been worried about her for years, and now he had the opportunity to provide the care she truly needed.
He designed a treatment plan that combined physical therapy, medication for pain management, and gentle exercises to strengthen her body. Mary followed the plan diligently, learning that enduring pain did not mean ignoring it.
She discovered that taking care of herself allowed her to continue caring for the ranch and the animals she loved. Dr. Henderson watched her progress with pride, noting how her determination and discipline made her a remarkable patient. The most significant change, however, was in Mary herself. For years, she had hidden her pain, believing that independence meant doing everything alone. But now she saw that strength could also mean accepting care, sharing her struggles, and forming connections. She realized that the town's support was not a burden. It was a gift, and it allowed her to maintain her independence in a healthier and more sustainable way. This insight transformed her perspective on life. One morning, as Mary fed the cattle with Tom's assistance, she paused and looked across the fields. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the hills, and for the first time in a long while she felt a deep sense of peace. The ranch still required effort and attention, but she no longer carried the burden entirely on her own. She had learned to balance her pride with humility, her independence with collaboration. The ranch, once a symbol of her solitary strength, had become a place of connection and shared responsibility. The town itself began to embrace Mary in new ways.
People who had once seen her as a quiet, distant figure now approached her with respect and admiration. They listened to her stories, asked about her life on the ranch, and offered support whenever it was needed.
Mary found herself participating in community events more frequently, attending small-town gatherings and even sharing her knowledge of ranching and animal care with younger generations. She discovered that her experience and resilience were not only valuable to herself, but also to others.
Through this process, Mary experienced moments of vulnerability that she had not allowed herself to feel in years. She shared her story with a few trusted friends, revealing the extent of her pain and the challenges she had faced alone.
Speaking about her struggles was difficult, but it was also liberating. She found that opening up allowed her to connect with people in ways she had never imagined. Her story inspired empathy and respect, and she realized that her experiences could serve as lessons for others about endurance, resilience, and the importance of community. The animals on the ranch seemed to sense the shift in Mary's energy. They moved with her more comfortably, responded to her voice with trust, and brought her small joys that reminded her of the bond they shared. The simple routines, feeding, grooming, and tending to the land, became moments of mindfulness and connection rather than just chores. Each day, she felt a growing balance between her body's limits and her mind's determination. Mary also began to appreciate the small joys that had previously been overshadowed by her struggle. A warm meal shared with a neighbor, a quiet conversation on the porch, the laughter of children running across the fields. These moments became sources of happiness and motivation. She realized that life was not just about survival or endurance. It was about connection, joy, and shared experiences. The town's support had transformed not only her daily life but also her perspective on what it meant to live fully. As spring approached, Mary's routine on the ranch became a blend of independence and collaboration. She tended to the animals in the land with care, but she did so with the understanding that help was available when needed. Tom continued to assist with heavier tasks, neighbors occasionally dropped by to share meals or lend a hand, and Dr. Henderson monitored her health closely. Mary embraced this balance, realizing that true strength lay in knowing when to stand alone and when to accept support. The revelation of Mary's struggles had also inspired a quiet change in the town's culture. People began to pay closer attention to each other, noticing when someone might be struggling in silence. Mary's story became a reminder that even the strongest-looking individuals might be carrying burdens unseen, and that kindness, empathy, and community were essential. Her life had always been an example of resilience, but now it also became a lesson in humility and connection.
By the end of Part 4, Mary Thompson had transformed in more ways than one. She was still the hard-working, determined rancher she had always been, but now she was also part of a community that understood and supported her. She had learned to share her burdens without losing her independence, to accept care without feeling weak, and to see the value of connection alongside self-reliance. The town, once shocked by her suffering, now admired her not only for her endurance but for her courage, wisdom, and openness. Mary's story was no longer just about pain and solitude. It was about transformation, resilience, and the power of human connection. She had faced years of silent struggle and emerged not just intact, but stronger, more connected, and deeply respected by those around her. The ranch, the animals, and the town were all part of a life she had fought to protect, and now she could enjoy it fully, supported by the community she had once kept at a distance.
Mary Thompson, the lone rancher who had shocked the town with her quiet endurance, had become a symbol of hope and inspiration. Her journey showed that strength was not about suffering alone. It was about recognizing limits, accepting help, and finding a balance between independence and connection. In facing her pain openly, she had taught the town a valuable lesson, that true courage lies not in hiding our struggles but in confronting them with honesty, resilience, and the support of those who care.
Mary Thompson had lived through many winters on her ranch, each one colder and more challenging than the last.
But nothing had tested her as profoundly as the last year when the harsh winter and her injury forced her to confront the limits of her body. The events of that season had changed her life in ways she could not have imagined. The pain she had carried in silence for decades had finally been acknowledged. and in the process she had learned an important truth. Strength was not only about enduring hardship alone, but about knowing when to accept help. With spring approaching, the ranch began to awaken. The grass grew taller, the wildflowers painted the fields in bright colors, and the cattle moved with more energy in the warming sunlight. Mary found herself walking across the fields with a sense of renewed purpose. Her ankle had healed, her body had adjusted to her therapy routine, and her spirit had grown lighter. The burden she had carried for so many years was still present. The aches, stiffness, and fatigue had not disappeared, but she had learned to manage them in a healthier, more sustainable way. Mary's mornings were no longer a race against her own body. She rose with the sun, as she always had, but she took her time. She would stretch gently before stepping outside, feeling each movement and adjusting to her limits. The animals came to her as they always did, but she no longer pushed herself beyond her capacity. She had discovered the value of pacing, of combining effort with care. The ranch work remained demanding, but it was no longer an exhausting struggle against her own body. Instead, it became a practice of balance, a way to connect with the land and the animals she loved. Tom remained a steady presence, helping when necessary but also respecting Mary's independence. He would often join her in the early mornings, carrying supplies or fixing fences, while Mary focused on the tasks she could handle herself. Their conversations were light, sometimes humorous, sometimes reflective, but always filled with mutual respect. Mary had learned to enjoy companionship without feeling that her autonomy was compromised. She could laugh, share stories, and even accept advice without feeling that she was losing control of her life. The town's respect for Mary deepened as her story spread further. People who had once seen her as a solitary figure now admired her courage and resilience. Mothers would point her out to their children, telling them about Mary's determination and her ability to care for the ranch despite pain. Young adults seeking guidance in farm work would visit her, eager to learn from someone who had not only survived but thrived in challenging conditions. Mary welcomed them with patience, teaching them skills she had honed over decades while subtly passing on lessons about endurance, humility, and the importance of community. Mary also took time to nurture herself in ways she had neglected for years. She began reading books in the evenings, listening to music she loved, and occasionally writing in her journal. In her writing, she reflected on her life, her struggles, and her growth. She documented the lessons she had learned about resilience, pride, and human connection. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to organize her thoughts and emotions, and a way to ensure that her experiences could serve as guidance for others. Her relationship with Dr. Henderson had grown stronger, too. He was no longer just her doctor, but a partner in her journey to maintain her health. He monitored her progress, adjusted her therapy plan, and celebrated the small victories with her. Mary respected his guidance and recognized that his care was a crucial part of her ability to continue living independently. She had once feared reliance on others, but now she understood that collaboration could coexist with self-reliance. Even her neighbors became part of her daily life in subtle ways. Mr. Davis would leave groceries on her porch, often accompanied by a friendly note. Children from the town would bring fresh eggs, help gather firewood, or simply run through the fields, laughing and playing, bringing energy and joy to the ranch. Mary had learned to embrace these gestures without hesitation. She realized that allowing others to contribute did not diminish her own effort. It enriched the life she had built and allowed her to experience companionship in ways she had long avoided. Mary's internal transformation was the most profound. She had once equated strength with silence, endurance with isolation, and independence with self-sufficiency. Now she understood that real strength could include vulnerability, acceptance, and connection. She no longer viewed help as a sign of weakness, but as a natural part of life. She had learned that balance between self-reliance and support could lead to a richer, more fulfilling life. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Mary sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn from soft pinks to deep oranges and purples. The animals were calm in their pens, the air was still, and the silence of the land felt comforting rather than lonely. For the first time in decades, she felt a sense of complete peace. The pain was still present, but it no longer defined her. She could acknowledge it without fear, manage it without despair, and live fully in spite of it. Her story had also left a lasting impact on the town. People spoke of Mary's courage not just because she had endured pain, but because she had transformed that endurance into a lesson of hope and inspiration. Young ranchers sought her advice. Neighbors checked on one another more attentively, and the community developed a stronger sense of empathy.
Mary had inadvertently taught the town a powerful lesson: that silent struggles often hide incredible strength, and that support, compassion, and connection are essential parts of human life. Mary herself began to share her story more openly.
She spoke to small groups of people about the importance of resilience, self-care, and community support. She explained that pain was not something to be ignored or hidden, but something to be understood, managed, and accepted with dignity. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring others to confront their own challenges with courage and to seek help when necessary. Her life had become a quiet beacon of hope for many who had never known her pain firsthand. In her personal life, Mary continued to find moments of joy. She tended her garden carefully, planting flowers and vegetables with the knowledge that her work now had meaning beyond mere survival. She celebrated the births of calves with gentle excitement, and she enjoyed watching the seasons change over her land, appreciating the beauty and rhythm of life. Each small victory, each moment of connection reinforced the lesson she had learned during her most difficult times. Mary also reflected on the importance of gratitude. She found herself appreciating the kindness of her neighbors, the patience of her doctor, the companionship of Tom, and the simple joys of life on the ranch. Gratitude became a daily practice, reminding her that even amid challenges, life offered moments of beauty and fulfillment. The pain, once overwhelming and isolating, had become a teacher, guiding her toward a life enriched by connection, understanding, and self-awareness. By the summer, the ranch had regained a sense of balance. Mary could complete her work independently while receiving help when necessary. The animals thrived, the fields flourished, and the community continued to support her in small, meaningful ways. Mary had discovered a rhythm that allowed her to live fully and healthily, combining independence with connection, effort with care, and pride with humility. Mary Thompson's journey had been long and challenging, filled with pain, loneliness, and relentless effort. Yet, through perseverance, self-reflection, and the support of her community, she had transformed her life. She was still the determined, hard-working rancher she had always been, but now she had learned to live with balance, grace, and openness. Her story had inspired the town, taught valuable lessons about resilience and human connection, and created a legacy of courage and hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mary sat on her porch, feeling the warmth of the fading light on her face. The ranch stretched out before her, quiet and peaceful. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment, feeling her body, her mind, and her spirit in harmony. She had endured pain, faced her limitations, accepted help, and embraced life fully. In that moment, Mary understood something profound. Strength was not just surviving alone. It was thriving with understanding, support, and the courage to live authentically.
Mary Thompson, the lone rancher who had once shocked the town with her hidden suffering, had emerged as a symbol of resilience, wisdom, and hope. Her story showed that even the quietest struggles could teach powerful lessons, and that human connection, empathy, and courage could transform not only individual lives but entire communities.
She had faced the harsh realities of life and pain, and in doing so, she had discovered a life richer, fuller, and more meaningful than she had ever imagined.